Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Molten Truth podcast. I am your host, Zoey Michaels, author of the book How to Fight Back Against Scammers. I'm loosely paraphrasing the title of the book because it's a really long one. And if you really want to know, look up zoeymichaels.com. But today we're here to talk with my guest from Canada. His name is Doug Lawrence. He is an international best-selling author of several books. And for more information, his website is here on his page, TalentC.ca. And so I'm going to let Doug take the floor and tell us about himself. And I'm sure we are all going to really just be amazed at his life and his stories. And I can't wait to hear it.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you. This may be a mistake by giving me the floor, but we'll do the best we can with what we've got to work with, I guess. So
sounds like a plan.
Yeah, I'm a retired Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer. I spent 25 years in the police force, got bounced all over from coast to coast to coast, I think is the saying that they use. Experienced lots of trauma. I was in a lot of the places I was posted or stationed. I was there by myself, or the only other person I had that I could use as support, and use is probably not the right term, but there was actually, count on, was my good wife, who became sort of that. She was the person that if you ever wanted to have a picture painted or understood what it was like to be a police officer's wife, she was the one. She dove right in full force. So 25 years in the police force, bounced all over, came back to civilization, as they call it, and we were in the lower mainland part of British Columbia and did a bunch of postings and stuff for transfers out from that location as well. And then the opportunity came to move to Saskatchewan and I got a promotion to come here. And we ended up, we spent a long time here in Regina, Saskatchewan. And as time went on, got involved, ended up private sector, working as a consultant, ended up being involved in the hockey world where I supervised hockey referees as sort of my part-time schlick, whatever you wanted to call it. But so I did that. I was both at the regional and at the national level. I was one of two or three national supervisors for female hockey referees. So I had that going on. I got involved in the mentoring part simply because of the leadership positions and stuff I was involved in. So I have probably close to 40 years of leadership and / mentoring experience that I think my latest total tally is about 3,500 hours of mentoring. So
amazing.
Wrote a number of books which you've mentioned, and been actively involved in mentoring and grief. So I've been trying to kind of connect the dots and be able to go through that. And then I guess from there, where would I go? I was dealing with my own personal grief, helping others with their grief, using mentoring techniques to be able to help them to do that. And I've just kept going, and I keep getting more and more involved in taking the mentoring components and kind of plugging them into the whole story of grief and that. And some people said, well, you should be retired by now. And I go, well, I'm still having fun and I'm still able to provide support to other people to help them.
Mhm.
and lots of things like that. So, and then along, I guess I was dealing with the whole post-traumatic stress thing, and I kind of got that under control. And then along came COVID, and then along came cancer, and cancer took my wife in 2021
Oh,
after she put up a good fight, but wasn't enough. So I included some of what had taken place and kind of her story, Deborah's story. I included that in my latest book, Grief: The Silent Pandemic,
okay.
and
And
so
that's the one that just came out in April
yeah,
of this year.
yeah, yeah.
So, if I'm hearing right, mentoring started years ago while your wife was still living. Did you both act in the world of mentoring, or was that specifically you?
No, it was actually that's a good point because it was actually both of us. Because I remember, I'd say, well, I've got to go to Winnipeg, Manitoba to do a workshop. Well, I'm going with you, okay? And the one I remember the one time we went, it was Winnipeg, and it was a full day workshop, and she got asked a question by one of the participants, and it had to do with um, the impact that what I was doing had on the family, and it was, and then it was also the aspect of the post-traumatic stress, and then it was the aspect of the alcohol got brought into the picture, and so they were asking questions about that, and she made the statement that I still remember to this day was he's pardon my language, but he's damn lucky he left the force when he did, because had he not have, we would have left him.
Wow.
So yeah, it was that was sort of that epiphany kick in the backside that every once in a while you need something like that. And so I had to have a fireside chat with her afterwards to sort of say, were you serious? And she said, you betcha. If you hadn't have changed your behavior, you'd have been doing it on your own.
Amazing. So, kind of serendipity that you ended up leaving at that point in time so that you still had Deborah by your side,
Yeah.
being that support and helper to you. Yeah.
And she did so many different things that you 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 don't expect. She just did them, and it was it made my life a whole lot easier. So that's
Yeah.
that's a
Isn't that the way it is with you know, a true spouse, a true
yeah
companion? It's almost easy to take it for granted because they're just really good at being supportive, and sometimes we just don't think about all they're doing behind the scenes to support us in their goals, right? In our goals, and hopefully we're reciprocating, but it can be kind of a quiet, almost under overlooked thing.
yeah yeah yeah. It was the toughest thing I have ever done was to sit in the emergency room when her family doctor had said, you need to get to the hospital to emergency as quickly as you can because something's not right. And so we go and we're sitting there, and this great doctor, he had a fabulous bedside manner. He was trying to make not, and this doesn't sound right, but he was sort of making light of the situation so that he could bolster the trust, not so much the trust, but the to give her hope.
Sure. Yeah.
you know
Maybe downplaying the serious a little bit so that she could not be overwhelmed by it.
yeah
Yeah.
and like the thing I remember the most about that whole scenario was sitting on the edge of the bed and him saying, well, we can do this and we can do that. And it was at that particular time point that I had, we talked about an epiphany. I had the epiphany that I was going to lose my wife, Deborah, to cancer. And that was tough.
I can only imagine. When we lose someone or when we know we're going to lose someone, no matter how quickly we lose them, it hurts no matter what. We see situations where people lose someone suddenly or within a few days or months, and hurt is hurt no matter how long it takes. We tell ourselves that at least you have the opportunity to say goodbye. And I feel like at least there's maybe a little bit of value in having that closure, maybe. But no matter how you cut it, there's just so much grief to work through.
Yeah. And for me, closure is important.
Yeah.
Closure is, if I don't get closure, if I am not completely satisfied that my mom, as an example, if that she wasn't okay, she was in a place where she was okay and a better world altogether. And then when Deborah came along, it was a natural progression. A natural thing for me to do was to take the steps that I do to get that closure.
Absolutely. We had a very similar situation in my family just within the last 2 to 3 weeks. We learned a family member had cancer. Mm-hmm. It was very serious. They gave her just a few months to live, and then it went down to she's going to die within 3 to 4 days. And she did. And I just felt so much for my niece because it was her mother-in-law. Yeah. And the roller coaster that she and her husband and all of them went through. But the most amazing thing about this particular woman was just her positive attitude through it all. She wasn't poor me. She was just like, I've had a good life. I have had a lot of joy, and I am so proud of my sons. And when we had her memorial, there were at least 4 or 5 women who were like, she was my best friend. And it was just amazing. But our attitude about those things really makes a difference.
It does. Yeah. Deborah had said that she didn't want any fanfare, anything. When I go, and just immediate family and that. And her work colleagues would have nothing to do with that. They said, no, we're doing something special, because she was a special person. So we did a celebration of life. She worked at one of the best hotel in the city here, and she worked there as a porter. She was the senior porter, and she was a people person. Oh my God, somebody, she would meet you for the first time, and the next time you came to stay at the hotel, she knew all about who you were, what your preferences were, everything. And it was the general manager of the hotel that had said that she was the hotel. If she wasn't there, it wasn't the same experience. So that by itself. And then when her work colleagues said, no, you're not getting off the hook that easy. We want to do a celebration of life, and so we did. We had close to 100 people come to the big fancy ballroom, and they had coffee and tea and dainties and all that sort of thing. And we had done all kinds of different things where we did every family member was given the responsibility of putting together a story that stood out for them with whether it was a mom or aunt or whoever. And we live streamed the whole thing so that those that were far away could still participate and stuff. So it was, I'm glad we didn't listen. You know, you kind of go, oh, gee, but I'm glad we didn't.
I mean, if nothing else, you saw how much love people had for her.
Yeah.
And that's huge. When you have that many people we want to remember this wonderful person, and such high praise too, that she was the hotel experience. It was good for you to hear that.
Yes.
Yeah. So I've allowed us to get off track just because it's an interesting, subject to talk about our grief and also how we process. But I'm curious, how did you start the road to being a mentor? I mean, where did that begin?
It started, it was actually when I was still in the police force, and I was job coaching college or university students outside of the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would work with them, help them, cover letter, resume, interview prep, all that sort of stuff. And we kept doing that. And then what would happen is something would happen in the workplace, which, it always does. And they didn't know how to deal with it. So they'd come to me and they'd say, what do we do? I've never experienced this before. What do I do?
Mm-hmm.
And so I would spend some time and I would ask or guide them to where the answers were. I said, I'm not going to tell you how to fix this,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm going to give you the guidance that you need,
Sure.
that you're searching for. And so I started that. And then the next thing you know is somebody said, oh, you've got this sort of problem, you should talk to Doug. And so it kept going. So what happened was a job coaching type of a function or role morphed itself into mentoring. And I started mentoring. And then I remember helping the local human resource, the provincial body, helping them set up or get a mentorship program going, and kind of doing all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it just evolved. And I think it was one of the students had said, you should do this for a living. We can't afford to pay you, but I'm sure somebody could. And I went, So I did some market research and basically confirmed what they said. But what I ended up doing was finding a business partner to create a training program to teach people how to become effective mentors.
Oh, wow.
And walk away with a certification that was premised on, it was based on intelligence, I guess, for lack of a better choice of words. You got a certification based on your knowledge, not so much on how well you would apply the knowledge. It was more so about, okay, I've got this body of knowledge that I've absorbed, and kind of going that way. So I did that, and my life story has just evolved where now I'm looking at how can I, and we talked about this before, but how I can blend the mentoring piece into the grief part.
Yes. Right. And I was kind of wondering about that. Now, was there inspiration as far as going toward dealing with the grief and trauma? Was there any specific moment that caused you to start thinking that direction?
Short answer would be that it was similar to my first book that I wrote, where it was suggested, you've written all these great blog articles and stuff, and why don't you roll them into a book? And so I did. And then along, came the next conversation I had with colleagues who said, you should write a book about this.
Mm-hmm.
And how mentoring, can certainly play a part and stuff. And then fast forward to where we are today. So, Yeah.
Okay. I was curious because you had told me a story, I think, at a point in time when you were a junior Mountie about a 16-year-old kid that really kind of stuck with you. I wondered if maybe he had been part of that inspiration to leading talking about grief.
I think that if I think back, I think that my my interaction with him
Mm-hmm.
was such that it awakened the PTSD in me,
Okay.
and it what it also did was it said that you can't fix everyone, but you can certainly be there to support someone.
Yeah.
And that's how that part got going, was because I look at my life as kind of being is from a certainly from a traumatic, or certainly from a monumental or stepping stone, but it was the police force. Sadly enough, it was the alcohol that ended up being part of my story as well.
Sure.
And then it was, getting to a place where we were, uh, was my relationship with Deborah had never been stronger than what it was. It was like we were so in tune with each other, and then from there, it went to the grief, dealing with grief, not only my own, but grief of other people. So helping them while I'm helping myself.
Absolutely.
So there's that part. And then, kind of fast forward to today where, now I'm international best-selling author, and I'm writing about grief, and I'm being asked to participate in grief support groups. I'm being asked to do a number of different things that are somewhat grief related. Um, and so that kind of is the progressive, kind of my journey.
Yeah. So you started out, your first book, I think, was Mentoring 101. That's the first book you wrote?
Yeah, The Gift of Mentoring was the official title.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then your next book was You Are Not Alone.
Correct.
Now, was that the first one that became a bestseller, or
Yeah.
okay? And was that one globally, or was that one just on Amazon?
It was both, actually. It
Okay.
was Amazon #1 bestseller, North America and the UK, and then it was the Global Book Award, the bronze recipient for the Global Book Awards.
Okay. Very cool. And do you have any news on how Grief the Silent Pandemic is faring since its release?
What I've had so far for feedback is more and more people asking to get their hands on a copy. So that's a good thing.
That's a very good thing. We love hearing that.
Yeah. And the other part is that people that have read it have said, wow, I hope you're going to continue to write. And in fact, we've already, we've kind of had some preliminary conversations, but the topic that we were thinking of writing about, or yeah, I guess about, is pretty deep, and I'm not sure. I know right now I'm not there. So, but I think eventually I could get to the point where, because it's in alignment with my beliefs. So I think it'd be an interesting read, that's for sure.
I bet it would. So, are there any hints about what that next book might be? Or I'm guessing it's still on the topic of grief, but any hints about that, or do we have to just wait and see?
Yeah, the only one word hint: spiritual.
Okay, all right. So there you go, folks. There's your hint. I'm trying to think of what else. I don't know if you feel like you want to talk about that 16-year-old. I don't want to force you to talk about things that might make you uncomfortable, but I feel like maybe that's a story you had intended to share with us.
Yes, yeah, short answer. And it goes this. It had a. I'm all over the place here, but it had a. Uh, it touched on a number of different lives, and so we. I was stationed in a small community. There was only two police officers in that community. I was one of them. And of course, small communities being what they are, you typically try to find stuff to amuse everybody in no matter what time of the year it is. Well, this was, minus 40 below weather, and we're out practicing our hockey skills because we're going to go down the highway or down the high, yeah, I guess we'll call it highway, down the highway a little ways, and we're going to take on the neighboring community, and we're going to beat them. We're going to teach them what hockey's all about. That's for sure. And so we were having our big practice trying to get orchestrated and get everything figured out as to who was on the team and who wasn't. And this young person had made the team. He had done what no one thought he could do, and that was he stepped it up so that he ended up getting selected to be part of the men's hockey team that was going to go down the highway and play the neighboring one. And he was just over the top, so excited, so proud. And we were pumping him up, trying to pump him up as much as we could. And then it was time for everybody to, call her at night and head home. And he goes home just full of exuberance and goes in, and he gets home to tell his parents, only to find that the both of them are absolutely, totally inebriated, way beyond being able to comprehend anything that he's trying to tell them.
Yeah.
And it was devastating. I felt for the young lad that, this was absolutely devastating. And so he went to the bedroom where the family kept their firearms, and he took a rifle, and it was death by suicide.
So how did it come to be known, like, that he, like, his feelings? Was he in contact with anyone before that happened? Were there any warning signs from the time he got home to the moment that you guys learned about the suicide?
No, there.
Okay.
I think the only thing that we truly knew was his level of, at that time, pre-firearm, his happiness and his, being recognized meant a lot to him, as it does, as it did for a lot of people in those smaller communities. So there was that part, and so small community, only two police officers, and junior man on the totem pole, so to speak, was myself. So I ended up having to investigate the death by suicide. So I ended up having to deal with that. And then anytime it was a sudden death like that, you had to take the deceased body to the closest morgue, and they do a postmortem and stuff. And that was me that had to make that trip. And that was, on the heels of having been on the ice skating with him and sharing in his excitement and everything else. And now it's like the rug got pulled out from underneath my feet as well. So sorry.
No, I just absolutely.
Yeah. We ended up, I had to take him in the police vehicle and drive him to the closest morgue, which was in a larger center. And it was like, was it about an 8-hour trip, I think, in minus 40 weather. And nobody wanted to go with me. And so my boss turned to Deborah, we weren't even married yet. and had said, "Would you like to spend some time with your soon-to-be hubby?" And she went, "Really?" And I'm going, "Say no, say no." And she said, I'll go with him." So she bundled up her stuff and threw everything in the vehicle. And I said, "You sure you want to do this?" And she said, oh yeah, it'll be good." No, it won't be, but anyhow. So her and I, we made the trip to the next largest center, 40 below weather. Um, had to, did the had to, well, obviously we went to the morgue, dropped the body off, loaded the rest of our stuff up, went, grabbed a hotel for the night, and came back. And she got to experience what it was like in some cases to be the wife of the local police officer, where if he or she needed support, you were the person that they would turn to. And so anyhow, she she did a good job. She weathered the storm, and it gave us the opportunity to have a conversation about what life could be like or would be like
Yeah.
going forward. So it was good that way. But I when I my response, even though, so we come back, and I report into my boss, and then I said I'm done for, because we were probably mid to late evening hours by the time we got back the next day. So um, I did what I typically did when I had to deal with stress, is I went to my liquor cabinet and grabbed the Scotch whiskey and threw the cap in the garbage and said, I got this. I got this.
And so was that normal behavior up to that point for you? That's how you typically dealt with that level of stress, or that wasn't the beginning of that?
No, I think, when I reflect back, that I'd already started down that slippery slope, and it was, it just, that was my coping mechanism.
And since we're talking about it, I'm assuming that you were able to get that under control. So what was maybe the turning point for you where you were able to conquer that?
It was the conversation I had mentioned before, where we were teaching the workshop,
Okay.
and that was the sort of the kick in the rear of my pants to be able to say, you may think that you're, a coping mechanism such as this, you may think that it's helping you deal with issues, but it's not. It's compounding them and making them worse. And on top of it all, you fool, you're going to lose your entire family if you don't do something about it.
Okay, so that's about that time frame. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I wasn't really clear on the timeline progression of all of that. So okay, that makes sense. So the mentoring, realizing that, helping yourself while you were helping the others, and then coming within that hair's breadth of losing your family and not even knowing it until Deborah made that comment.
Yeah.
Okay. So just out of curiosity, you've lived this very full life. You have some really great experiences. You had some disappointments. And then, of course, you've shared a lot of what you learned in your books. Do you have maybe a favorite piece of advice to give to people, or perhaps a piece of advice that was given to you that you still use for yourself?
The one thing that stands out for me was the fact that, other than Deborah and my two children, that was it for a support structure. Mm-hmm. And I think to ask them to fulfill that role was beyond their capability. And so instead of maybe making it better, it may have been making it worse.
Mhm.
So, there was certainly that part. But if I had to, if I had to say one thing, it would be to the listeners out there, is that if you have or are experiencing, certainly mental health challenges, if you're experiencing issues with dealing with your grief and stuff like that, for God's sakes, reach out and ask for help, and don't try to weather the storm on your own, because it's a rocky ride, and you can you can deal with it better if you deal with it with someone walking by your side.
Absolutely. You know, speaking for myself and just kind of what I went through that set me on this path, one of the things that I learned from a friend, and it was just a passing comment, but it had a profound impact on me. She didn't use the actual scientific term, but the scientific term that sticks with me is affect labeling, which was basically being able to give a name to your pain, being able to speak about it helps to reduce the emotional state. And I had already been in the process of doing that through being a guest on other people's podcasts, as it turned out. Um, but once I understood that and researched that after her passing comment, I really embraced it and took it just a completely different direction that even I didn't imagine I would do. But you know, being around people, being able to speak your heart, and sometimes it has to be to a stranger. Sometimes the people closest to you are the least people that you maybe are willing to open up to. But it is important to open up.
And that's probably one of the most significant things that we've said today, is opening up.
Yes.
And because if you don't process or deal with the grief and stuff that you've got in front of you today,
Mm-hmm.
when the next wave comes, it's compounded, it's worse.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And if you bury it, it becomes seeds that sprout later on.
And it's kind of funny, because I went this afternoon. I could see my calendar was starting to fill up, and I had to go and get these silk flowers, the plastic silk flowers, because every year I make a trip back to the old homestead, back to the old cemetery, and I plant these flowers in honor of my parents who are buried there. And um, I'm standing in line with this massive bouquet of fake flowers, and there's a guy with 4 bottles of water trying to, you can tell he's in a hurry. He's being very polite and everything else. So I said, you've got only a few items. Why don't you go ahead? And part of it was me thinking, well, if I'm nice, he'll ask me, what am I doing with all these flowers? And I get to tell my story.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't. So he paid for his stuff and turned and said, thank you again, and have a good weekend. And away he went. And I got back in line and stuff like that. But I got to thinking, I find that more often than not now, is that if you don't open the door for me to tell the story, I'm going to open it myself.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to do that.
Exactly, because if I don't, it's just going to compound and continue to grow, and I don't want that.
Absolutely. So I think we've got enough time. What is that story? Was it simply the story that you were taking the flowers to put at your parents' grave, or
Yeah.
was there more to it than that?
No, that was pretty much it. Because I've had it where I've gone to the bank for some reason or other, and bumped into somebody that I have no clue who they are, and we start sharing stories about family members who have passed, and or friends or colleagues or whatever, and it helps.
It does. It absolutely does. We really do need that. And, I always tell people, because in my line of work, my day job, I still run into people who, tell me that they just lost someone they loved, because I'm in the healthcare field. And I always pass along the one piece of advice that really helped me, especially when I lost my dad, because for me, that was the hugest loss of my life. And it was that everyone processes grief differently. There's no right or wrong length of time to grieve. It takes as long as it takes.
Yeah.
So I always share that with everyone, because for me, that was the single most useful thing I heard during my grieving time.
Yeah.
And I grieved for a very, very long time over my dad.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience before we wrap this up?
No, I think we've covered a lot.
We did. We did. Well, after we're done with this recording, I am going to ask you to start something that I hope to start passing along in all my future interviews. And what I'm going to start doing is asking a guest to leave a question behind for a future guest. I borrowed this from someone else's podcast who's in the health field. I thought, what a great idea. So while I get ready to hit the end record button, start thinking about what would be a really cool question to ask future guests. Anytime, let me begin this recording.